Right, so as news once again broke on Sunday of dozens more Palestinians becoming victims of Israel's genocidal actions, many, while queuing for humanitarian aid, Israel's ambassador to Greece, Noam Katz, took to the press to express a deep diplomatic grievance. His complaint was not about the actions of his state against the people whose land they illegally occupy, nor about the use of starvation as a weapon of war, nor about the siege imposed by his own government. It was about graffiti. Specifically, Katz was condemning anti-Zionist slogans that had been graffitied on a wall in Athens, graffiti that had actually already been removed by city authorities. For Katz, the real outrage wasn't in Rafah's refugee camps or in the bombed ruins of Gaza City. It was in a can of spray paint in the Greek capital, the work of which was already gone apparently. Manufactured outrage 101. However, the mayor of Athens, in stark contrast to the Greek national government, Haris Doukas, wasn't having a bar of this. He turned around and gave Noam Katz the treatment by saying, "We will not take lessons in democracy from those who kill civilians." Where national governments have cloaked genocide in euphemism and equivocation out of moral cowardice and treating Israel as different as Zionists wish things to be, Doukas spoke with unapologetic clarity in a manner Israel still can't get used to, and their response is what has driven this story to go somewhat viral. The confrontation between Doukas and Katz encapsulated the obscenity of a diplomatic order where the sensibilities of genocidal states are defended more vigorously than the lives of their victims, but more and more people, including elected officials like Doukas, just aren't having it anymore. Right, so Haris Doukas' response to what is a pretty lousy attempt at distraction in my view, an Israeli official once more expressing how they have been harmed by something whilst their nation literally commits genocide, is another crack in the global discourse surrounding Israel's actions in Gaza, a moment where moral clarity has triumphed over the manipulative rhetoric of civility. It situates this incident within the broader context of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, the strategic weaponization of anti-Semitism, and the silence of far too many European governments. In doing so, it shows how the power of a municipal leadership can restore ethical boundaries within an international community that has, by and large, abandoned it. And this is as true in Greece with their national leadership as it is in so many European states. While Noam Katz was fulminating over graffiti in Athens that had already been removed by the time of his complaint, apparently, Gaza was, of course, bleeding again. On the same day, August 3rd as this was, at least 40 Palestinians were killed by Israeli fire, including more than 30 at aid distribution points in central Gaza. According to Reuters, shroud supplies were so limited that children were being wrapped in makeshift sheets so they were buried in shallow graves under siege conditions. Food convoys were again prevented from entering the likes of Rafah and Khan Yunis, while airdropped aid was confiscated by Israeli-backed militia groups operating in the buffer zones. Among the dead were 6 children who had starved to death in makeshift shelters after being cut off from medical care. Their deaths brought the total number of famine-related deaths in Gaza to more than 175 since Israel's full blockade intensified in May. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, confirmed that over 1.2 million Gazans, over half the population, are now entirely dependent on irregular and unsafe airdrops, with children and the elderly disproportionately affected. So this is not a conflict. It is not warfare. It is not a complex situation either. It's mass death. It's genocide. It is the deliberate targeting of civilians, the use of starvation as a weapon, and the systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure along with it. Gaza's health system has collapsed fundamentally, functionally, with makeshift field clinics running without anaesthetic, without clean water, without electricity. Doctors are being forced to amputate limbs without pain relief. Infants born prematurely are dying in incubators because there's no fuel to power them anymore. Satellite images and verified video footage show razed neighbourhoods, mass graves, bombed UN facilities. These atrocities are not speculative. They are recorded, they are published, they're evidenced, and they're denounced by international humanitarian law experts, but sadly not by governments and people in positions of power. That they continue uninterrupted is a testament to the complicity of global power structures that allow such crimes to unfold without meaningful consequence still. So the situation has grown so dire that humanitarian organisations have begun to describe Gaza as uninhabitable now. The World Health Organization has lost contact with more than 60% of its staff in the Strip, while UN OCHA officials have repeatedly been denied access by Israeli authorities, yet they get the blame for food not turning up because they're denying it from entering, and the OCHA have got nothing therefore to deliver. Satellite imagery confirms the near total erasure of civilian infrastructure in northern and central Gaza. Thousands are missing and presumed dead under rubble. 10% of Gaza's population can't be accounted for. Western governments have responded not with sanctions, but with more platitudes. The US, the UK, they continue to supply arms and diplomatic cover, while the European Union has largely remained frozen between rhetorical concern and unforgivable action. And yet, while all of this is occurring, Noam Katz's diplomatic bandwidth was occupied by defaced masonry. According to the Jerusalem Post, Ambassador Katz condemned the appearance of what he referred to as anti-Semitic graffiti in Athens, claiming it reflected a hostile climate towards Israeli tourists and investors. He characterised the slogans as incitement to violence and demanded that the Athens city government issue an official apology and take stronger measures against what he described as anti-Israel extremism. This narrative was picked up, as it would be, by Israeli media outlets, including the likes of Haaretz, the Times of Israel, and I-24, all of which framed the incident as evidence of rising European anti-Semitism. However, several key facts undermine this framing. First, the graffiti in question had already been removed before Katz's comments were made public. Second, the slogans, while certainly inflammatory, were against Israel and against Zionists, not against Jews. At least none of the source material I've seen mentions any such graffiti that made such comments, which absolutely would be anti-Semitic. But here, based on what I've seen, to call them anti-Semitic would be to conflate Israeli criticism with anti-Semitism, a failing of the IRA definition as that is, because it allows that conflation to be made in part. And Israel cannot be above reproach for what it is doing now and has been doing for decades against the Palestinian people. The graffiti had not been linked to any violent action either, and the city authorities had taken the appropriate steps to remove it, as any unwanted graffiti would be. Thirdly, there's a glaring contradiction in Katz's claim that Israelis feel unsafe in Athens, while the Israeli upper middle class has been flooding the Greek real estate market, particularly in Athens and Thessaloniki. Israeli property purchases under Greece's golden visa scheme have increased by some 90% in recent years. Katz was not therefore reacting to a real security threat at all. He was just executing a tired old strategy play from the Israeli playbook, using the language of anti-Semitism not to protect Jewish safety at all, but to shield Israeli impunity from criticism. By focusing international attention on a wall that had already been apparently scrubbed clean, Katz sought to divert moral outrage away from Gaza's mass graves and towards a narrative of Israeli victimhood. Therefore, Haris Doukas did not merely defend Athens from an unfair diplomatic accusation, he reasserted the primacy of moral judgment in political life, and he took to Twitter by way of response to what Katz had said. We do not accept lessons in democracy from those who kill civilians. Athens, the capital of a democratic country, fully respects its visitors and supports the right of free expression of its citizens. As the city's municipal authority, we have proven our active opposition to violence and racism, and we do not accept lessons in democracy from those who kill civilians and children in food lines, from those who lead dozens of people to death every day in Gaza, from bombs, hunger and thirst. It is appalling that Mr. Ambassador focuses only on graffiti, which is obviously being erased, while an unprecedented genocide is being carried out in Gaza. Let me also inform Mr. Ambassador that in the last year the number of Israelis who have been granted a Greek golden visa has increased by over 90%. Doukas' statement resonated so deeply because it was unflinching. You can feel the anger, the heat in his words at the slight Israel has casually thrown at his city in their ongoing determination to cover their actions with as much propaganda as it takes. It also exposes the utter lack of diplomatic morality that has come to define much of Europe's response to the Gaza genocide. While other leaders offer boilerplate calls for de-escalation, whilst doing nothing to actually achieve it, Doukas has named the horror and laid down a damning and deserved response. Where others blurred the line between critique and complicity, he drew it sharply. In the context of an international environment that punishes those who speak the truth about this grave and frankly avoidable situation, if matters had been dealt with, if Israel had been dealt with as any other country had in the decades past already, we wouldn't be here, would we? And rewards euphemism as well, Doukas' defiance has become a global moment of reckoning. Well, Haris Doukas spoke with clarity, acted as a leader in defence of his city, his people, in the face of a pathetic attempt at winning back the optics of what is actually happening in Gaza at Israel's hand. The Greek national government remains conspicuously quiet, and this does not make them look good at all. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis and his New Democracy Party made no public comment in support or condemnation of either Katz's accusation or Doukas' response. This silence in many ways spoke volumes, didn't it? It reflected a government trapped between strategic alliances with Israel, which they are very fond of, alliances driven by military and energy and intelligence cooperation, and a growing domestic discontent over Israel's actions amongst the populace. In contrast, Greece's opposition parties responded with a unified front. Syriza, PASOK and the Communist Party all backed Doukas. Well, you expect PASOK to, at the very least. This is Haris Doukas' own party, after all. But Syriza expressed full support for Doukas as well, while the Greek Communist Party stated that the public in Greece overwhelmingly supports the Palestinian cause. And certainly we've seen that already in places like Syros and Rhodes, and pledged to continue public demonstrations, large examples of which have been seen before in cities such as Athens, against Israeli military operations. Ambassador Katz's rhetorical strategy was nothing unusual. It was nothing new, was it? It follows that well-established, well-worn pattern where criticism of Israeli state violence is recast as anti-Semitic incitement. This conflation has been so well documented over and over again now, and criticised justifiably by numerous scholars and human rights bodies. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, widely adopted as it has been in Western democracies, has itself been used as a tool to suppress Palestinian advocacy, that conflation I mentioned a moment ago. Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, has warned that this instrumentalisation of anti-Semitism undermines real efforts to combat racial hatred by blurring the line between racism and political accountability. The real danger of all of this rhetorical sleight of hand is that it delegitimises both the fight against real anti-Semitism, the real threat to Jewish people around the world, and the global struggle against apartheid and genocide. By painting critics as bigots, the Israeli government immunises itself from scrutiny. And this strategy not only protects a regime of oppression, it actively criminalises the language needed to oppose it. When Doukas condemned Israeli war crimes, he was immediately framed in some quarters of the Israeli press as enabling hate speech. Yet his remarks did not target Jews or Judaism, as I've also said already. I haven't heard or seen an example of the graffiti that did that either, though I stand to be corrected, obviously. But they targeted a state apparatus as it is engaged in mass killing. To conflate the two is not only dishonest, it is politically deeply dangerous, and it is a threat to Jewish people worldwide. As for the party Doukas is a part of, he is a member of PASOK, as I said, centre-left party with a long history of internationalism, anti-fascism, and solidarity with anti-colonial movements. In the 1980s, under Prime Minister Andreas Papandreou, PASOK was one of the few European parties to openly support the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. It opposed NATO's more hawkish positions and sought an independent path for Greece in global affairs. Doukas' statement thus reflects not only a personal conviction, but the politics of his own party as well. So Greece's left has always understood what it means to live under foreign domination. From the Nazi occupation to the military junta, the Greek people have fought back against authoritarianism. It's part of their history. That legacy infuses PASOK's stance on Palestine. It explains why Greek activists were early participants in the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and why Greek trade unions and student groups have consistently mobilised against Israeli war crimes. In this context, Doukas' words are not radical at all. They are quite consistent with a deeply rooted historical Greek tradition that sadly isn't being reflected in its current national government. Doukas joins a growing list of municipal leaders who have taken bold positions against Israeli apartheid in the absence of meaningful state-level action. Barcelona cut ties with its twin city of Tel Aviv. Dublin passed a motion declaring Israel an apartheid state. Liège, Oslo, Geneva have all seen city council votes demanding sanctions. These cities are not anomalies. They're the new front line of moral leadership in Europe. It's happening at municipal level within multiple states as national governments sit on their hands. At municipal level, they are freed from the constraints of international diplomacy, so mayors and local councils are responding directly to the ethical demands of their populations. And this municipal revolt reflects a deeper truth. The global political class is increasingly out of step with its own citizens. As civil society grows more outraged by images of bombed hospitals and starving children, national leaders retreat into language about security concerns and complex dynamics. But cities are closer to the ground, aren't they? They see protest movements. They're happening on their doorsteps, their very doorsteps. They feel the public pressure more immediately. They are in many ways the last responsive institutions in a political system paralysed by strategic interests. Doukas' statement is not just a personal act, it's part of a broader reclamation of moral clarity from the debris of international diplomacy. Therefore, the real scandal was not the graffiti on a wall in Athens at all. It was the spectacle of a state representative attempting to transform paint into a more urgent crisis than the starvation of children. The Israeli ambassador's outrage was a deliberate distraction from absolute atrocity. That a Greek mayor had the courage to call it out is not something to be criticised, it's something to be celebrated, but above all, emulated. When diplomacy becomes a tool to protect genocidaires, and when silence is demanded of those who see clearly, moral responsibility shifts. It moves from states to cities, from ministers to mayors, from protocol to principle. Harris Dukas spoke truth to power as we all should. And in doing so, he reminded the world that some truths are too urgent to whisper. They must be shouted, even if they offend someone's delicate sensitivities, especially if they offend. Besides, if Israel wanted to be offended about something, you'd imagine their own hostages and their own government not getting them out still 22 months on would be a bigger issue, wouldn't you? Especially when their heritage minister once said hostages to be reclassified as POWs now, prisoners of war, so Israel can legitimately ignore them until after they've defeated Hamas. And there was me thinking the whole reason for Israel to invade Gaza to begin with, all the way back in October of 2023, was to get the hostages out, wasn't it? Get all the details of the outrage that's been caused by this horror of a minister and the backlash he's triggered, and this video recommendation here is your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the very same time, which is massively appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.